Hey everyone. As I'm recording this, I'm in my office, and across the hall from me, one of my colleagues who is proficient at projecting his voice is teaching. And so even with my door shut, I can hear him in there teaching. So if his voice comes through on this recording, I apologize. Hopefully it won't. As you can see, we are diving into week 3 of the semester. And if you are here watching this video now and you haven't yet watched and read the materials from Professor McIntosh concerning the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers, stop this now. Go back and read and watch those. And then this should be your second stop after that. We're mentioning that in the actual materials on Google Classroom, but just in case, I wanted to make a point of mentioning that now. What I am going to have you read for this week is what's listed here. You're going to, in the Via Antiqua text, that's the literature text that was provided to you as a PDF. I'm going to want you to read the allegory of the cave. This is included as part of Book 7 of the Republic. So, as it mentions here, if you go to page 149, and you need to really specifically pay attention to the page number that is printed on the pages themselves. I noticed some discrepancies from what page the PDF was telling me I was on versus the page number that was actually showing on the page. But on 149, as it shows on the page itself, scroll down to the bottom and you'll see Book 7. Start reading there and then stop when you get to page 151 and you reach that first paragraph break that you'll see. It's up toward, I don't know, maybe about a third of the way down from the top of that page. Read that. That's what you'll need to have read for today's lecture. So we're going to, let me go back. We're going to specifically talk about Socrates and Plato, those two Greek philosophers. So Socrates, born in circa 470 BCE, was a Greek philosopher from Athens, whose life we really only know through the writings of his students, including Plato, who we're going to talk about in a moment, and another of his students named Xenophon. We really only know about his life through their writings. He didn't really write anything down himself, or if he did, it hasn't survived. His Socratic method laid the groundwork for Western systems of logic and philosophy. It's this system of asking leading questions of the student that are meant to guide the student into arriving at the answers themselves. You've experienced this. It's used by teachers to this day. If you've ever had a teacher who, when you asked them a question, started asking you questions because they're confident that you can come up with the answer on your own, then you've been dealing with the Socratic method. Another famous example of it is if you're familiar at all with how Jesus is represented in the Gospels in the Bible. Christ uses the Socratic method very often. People will ask him, "Who are you?" or "How can I achieve the kingdom of heaven?" They'll ask him several questions, and his response will usually be a question back to them. "Who do you say I am?" Right? Things of that nature. That's the Socratic method. It is, as I say, the basis of Western logic and philosophy to this day. Right? The stuff that Socrates said and the writings of Plato and the things that Plato and other philosophers said that he said have really been the basis. This is where Western philosophy really kicks into high gear. right? And the arguments that are still going to this day over, what, 20, almost 2,500 years later, began here. Like, philosophers are still sort of arguing about a lot of these ideas even to this day. Now, it's difficult to separate out exactly what Socrates taught versus the words that Plato put into his mouth. Right? It's hard to separate the two and figure out exactly what was it that Socrates was saying during his lifetime. But at the very least, we seem to know that he was questioning a great deal about ancient Greek culture, particularly things like questioning the existence of the Greek gods, as well as questioning and challenging the Athenian system of democracy. One thing he is often quoted as saying is that true knowledge lies in accepting that you know nothing. And he would often say to others, at least in the writings about him, that he would say, I know nothing.
Socrates, the only true wisdom consists in knowing that you know nothing.
That's us, dude.
Oh, yeah.
Which was perhaps part of the questioning as well, was sort of putting on this veil of like, I don't know anything, right? Because he would say the more you learn about the world and the universe around you, the more you realize that you don't know, and that your place in it is as this very small and insignificant creature. You are such a small part of it all. So to suggest that you know anything when the vast majority of things that you don't know so much outweighs that little tiny fraction of the things there are to know that you do know, is so vast that you might as well say, there is literally nothing that I know. I don't know anything. So that when the political climate of Athens turned, and there was a government in place that was less tolerant of these ideas that he was going around and teaching everyone, Socrates was sentenced to death on the charge of corrupting the youth, and he died of hemlock poisoning in 399 BCE. He, I thought I had another bullet point there, but he chose that death rather than to leave his beloved city-state of Athens, because he was given the option. Socrates was told, look, you can be executed, you can die by hemlock poisoning for these crimes of corrupting the youth, or you can be exiled from Athens and never return. And something that Plato and other students of Socrates write about when they write about Socrates' life is that he seemed to have this tendency. He loved Athens so much that if he, on the few occasions that he ever had to actually leave the city, he would like literally go insane. And the further away from the city he traveled, the worse it got. And so the idea for Socrates of leaving Athens and never being able to return was too much. And so he chose death instead. Now, Plato, born 428, died around 348 BCE, was a Greek philosopher, again in Athens, who founded the Academy, which was one of the first institutions of higher learning. And he is the author of many philosophical works of unparalleled influence in Western thought. His writings explored justice, beauty, theology, cosmology, like how the stars work, epistemology, and the philosophy of language, as well as sort of diving into ideas about art, things of that nature. His writings take the form of dialogues, meaning a conversation between two or more people. Right? They're often written very much like you would think you would expect a play to be written. Right? This person name and what they said, and this person's name and what that person says, and it's written very much like a script in that way. These dialogues are usually depicting a conversation between Socrates and some poor random Athenian citizen who Socrates just makes absolute intellectual mincemeat out of. And then he has that poor person like questioning what they think they know. They're questioning their beliefs, and by the end of it, they're agreeing with Socrates and his ideas. Like that's how these treatises that Plato writes normally go. And the most important of these, the most influential by a long shot, is his writing called The Republic. As I mentioned before, Plato was a student of Socrates. He would go on to form the academy, and he would become the teacher of Aristotle, who is someone that you'll hear about from Professor McIntosh. So, Plato, his ideas, and the ideas that he sort of puts in the mouth of Socrates. Now, as I said, like we're gonna refer to all of this as Plato's ideas. These are, we get the feeling that most of this is Plato, right? But he puts all of these words in the mouth of Socrates. So it's very hard to parse out the two. It's hard to separate the two, right? Because everything that we read from Plato, it's not he himself who's giving us the information. He depicts Socrates, his teacher, as the one who's saying it. But these theories seem to be mostly Plato's, built upon things that he learned from Socrates. And his main model of the universe, if you will, is one that has been termed Plato's theory of forms. According to Plato, the world that we live in, the world that we can perceive, is a poor imitation of what is actually the real world. He says that our world that we live in is constantly changing, and that we have to rely on our senses, which can be fallible. They can fool us, our senses, in order to understand what's going on around us. He would say not only does the world around us constantly change, but people change too. He would say that you're not the same person that you were 3 years ago, 3 hours ago, 3 seconds ago, right? Bodies change, we grow older, and things either work well or don't work well on our bodies. They start to break down. Ideas sort of flip through our minds. Some of them maybe stick. Some of them we think about for a moment and they're gone. We learn things as we grow. We have new experiences every day, which makes us a different person than we were the day before. And we all change as a result of that, as does the world around us. So Plato doesn't like that. Plato doesn't like the idea that it's all constantly in changing and constantly in flux. He believed that the real world must be a world that is outside of this physical one that we live in. There must be something outside of this. He would say that this real world, this reality, is actually unchanging and eternal. And this is the world of ideas, not our senses, where there are perfect forms of all of the things that we know here on earth in the physical world. So in this sort of additional realm that is actual reality, right? This what he calls the realm of the forms or realm of ideas, right? You have to remember he was writing all this in ancient Greek. This is like translations of what he was saying, right? In the realm of the forms, he says that there is a perfect form of every single physical thing that exists in this world. This realm of forms, he says, is produced by a source that he refers to as the good. Now, later philosophers and theologians, much later down the line, would get a hold of Plato's ideas and would start equating the good with the notion of the Christian God. But that's sort of a misinterpretation of what he's talking about here, because Plato doesn't say that the good is an autonomous being like God who is actively making decisions to create things in the world. He says the good, and you could consider it a god maybe, but he's wibbly wobbly about that ideology. The good is a source, right? It doesn't necessarily create all of these things, but it is the source of all of these things. It's confusing, I know, and it may feel strange and foreign, but we're going to kind of break it down as we get into it and see if I can help you understand what he's getting at here. This realm of forms is perfect, he would say, or ideal. And everything that we know in the physical world as an imperfect representation or a copy of the forms that exist in the realm of forms.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
So again, let's kind of try to wrap our heads around it a bit. Plato says all this stuff that we encounter in the world that we think is reality is in fact constantly changing, not the same from moment to moment. So how can that be reality? Because reality shouldn't be something, he says at least, that isn't eternal in some form or fashion. And so what Plato kind of arrives at is the notion that the thoughts that we have in our heads when we think about the things in our surroundings, in this what we perceive to be the real world, it's those thoughts, those concepts, those ideas about the stuff that's actually us getting in touch with, let's say, what actually is reality. Reality is this realm of forms where the perfect eternal version of everything we have in this world actually exists. So here's a nice graphic I found that kind of breaks this down, if you will. Right? So what we have up here, what this graphic refers to as forms in the realm of being, and what I was calling the realm of forms. He says forms are transcendent, eternal, intelligible, archetypal, and perfect. Let's break those words down. Transcendent, meaning they transcend any like physical attributes of this world, right? They're eternal. So they've always existed and they will continue to exist into infinity, right? They are intelligible, meaning we can understand them with our minds. We don't have to touch them in order to understand them. They are archetypal. I'll kind of dive into that after I sort of talk about things in the realm of becoming, or things in the physical world. But archetypal, well, I'll talk about that. And they're perfect, right? The realms, the forms in the realm of forms are perfect. The forms are ideal, right? They are the ideal versions of anything that we would have in this world. And he says the forms are the cause of all things. So, like the form of a table, or the form of justice, or the form of blueness. Now, I'll get to that, all that in just a moment. Things in the realm of becoming, or things here in the physical world, right? The things that the objects, the stuff that we encounter in this world are spatio-temporal, meaning they take up a certain amount of space, and temporal, they exist for a certain amount of time, right? They are dependent upon space and time. So they take up space, right? Like this bottle literally takes up space, and if I put it down on my table, you can't see that. If I put it down on my hand, nothing else can, be in the same amount of space. Then they're temporal. At some point, this bottle did not exist, right? It had to be created, and then it came into being. It's here, and at some point, who knows how long from now, because plastic loves to stick around, this bottle will no longer exist. Or at least, at the very least, it will transform into something else, right? They're changeable. I just mentioned this could be changed into something else. We just talked about how humans change from day to day. The table that I am sitting at, it changes, right? It gets worn and weathered. The wood is being is degrading as time goes on. Eventually, it won't be here either, right? They're sensible, meaning we use our senses in order to know that they're there. If I didn't have any of my five senses, if I had none of them, I had no sight, no touch, no taste, no smell. I'm missing one, and no hearing. I could not detect the existence of this table. I need at least one of those senses in order to know that it's here, right? And they're copied. They're copies of those perfect forms, and as such, they are imperfect because the copy can never be exactly what the original was, right? The copy is always going to be, in his estimation, an imperfect representation of something that is perfect, right? And he makes that judgment. He makes that judgment that the real physical world that we live in is imperfect, and as such, it falls short of the perfection that is the realm of forms. All right, so let's talk about that. So the form of table, right? So what the concept of what makes a table, right? A table is something that should have a flat surface that is at a very specific kind of height. It needs to be something that we can sort of sit and our legs could go up under, right? There are certain things, right? Certain requirements at the very basic level that we need in order to make a table. Those things are just intelligible, right? I don't have to touch anything to understand that, right? And so what Plato would say then is that there is that perfect form of what a table should be in the realm of forms, right? But in the physical world, we make different tables, and each one is different from the other, like a coffee table, a dining table, a work table, a table for making crafts on. There's so many different ways in which that can come into being. And each of those tables, again, is something that we need to see, we need to touch, we need to smell, what have you, to know that it's there and to understand the differences between them. Each of them participates, however, in that perfect form of a table. But each of them is an imperfect version of that. Now, the form of justice. right? Justice is a big, huge concept. And in the real world, in the physical world, we have come up with a few different ways of trying to attain justice, whether it be a constitution, whether it be in the United States, the Bill of Rights, or socialism, right? Each of these, Plato would say, of course, none of these existed in his time, but each of these, he would say, is an imperfect attempt to create something that participates in the form of justice. But now here it gets a little more tricky. The form of blueness, right? Blueness. And you might be thinking to yourself, but wait a minute, blueness is something I can see. It's something I have to sense with my eyes, right? So why is that up in the realm of forms? Why isn't that something that's down in the realm of, or in the physical world, right? Well, let's look at the examples here. The color of the sky, imagine that in your mind, versus the color of the ocean, versus the color of denim. Now, all three of those are colors that we would look at, we would call blue. But put them next to each other, and they're all very different. The sky is not the same color as the ocean. Otherwise, we'd stand at the ocean and we wouldn't be able to see that separation of the horizon between the water and the sky, right? Those are two different types of blue. And the color of denim of your blue jeans, right, is completely different from either of those. And yet we would point at any one of those three and we would say that's blue. Plato would say that that means that each of those objects has the quality of blueness, which in the realm of forms, there is a perfect form of blueness. And that each of those different versions of blue is an imperfect copy of that blueness. So that anything that is something that we would consider to be blue in color, we would say participates in that blueness. It has the quality of blueness, but it's imperfect.